Good afternoon, and I hope you all can clearly hear me. Please let me know if it's not the case. And I hope you can see my PowerPoint slides as well. So I'll quickly get started and let anyone join us as we go along. As you may already know, the exact intention of these information sessions is to inform potential clients and anyone who's basically interested in pursuing their higher education in Sweden and Finland about how the application process works through us and what kind of information you need to know before making a decision and the kind of costs that you may have to bear throughout the process. So I'd like to explain a bit about ourselves first. I know most of you have arrived here from social media channels of ours, but to tell a bit about us again, we have been operating for the past 15 years from 2010. And we are among the first couple of firms in Sri Lanka to promote higher education in Sweden, and certainly the first in Sri Lanka for higher education in Finland. We back then we had this free education system where all international students had access to free education in Finland. You didn't have to pay any tuition fees. We made use of that opportunity and try to promote it, obviously, with the intention of making profit. So that's what happened. And I'm quite surprised to see how Finland has kind of become a major destination nowadays. And also, we have managed to secure scholarships over 1 billion worth of rupees over the last 15 years. And also, we have processed over 2,000 Sri Lankan nationals now successfully for both Sweden and Finland, and hundreds of them have managed to become citizens, permanent residents. So we're quite happy about our track record. So moving forward, I already explained about the organization, but then I need to inform you about this last point. The very reason why we conduct these information sessions in advance is because we need to ensure, we manage to recruit the number of students we can effectively handle as soon as possible. Honestly, this year, I think we have still opened up our application periods mainly because we can process few more numbers. But on average, our annual handling capacity is about 50 to 60 applications every year. That's because I always handle these applications personally myself with the support of my team. So if you guys are familiar with some of these application periods, especially the application period for some of these Finnish research universities, it'll last only for 2 weeks. So regardless of the numbers we accept, there's always a number of applicants we can effectively process within that 2 year time duration, and that's 2 weeks time duration, and that's the exact reason why we conduct these sessions in advance. So we have already received about, I think, 75% of the number of applications we can handle, but I think we will keep our application period open for the next 2 or 3 or 4 weeks max. So anyone who want to go through us could place your applications. It's about time now. If you think about the Swedish application portal, it's already open now. And couple of Finnish universities, Finnish research universities, where our services are limited to at the master's level, they will open up in the month of December. And the remaining universities will have their joint application period around the early week of January. If you want to go through us, we obviously need these documents and applications. We need to process the applications at least 4 to 6 weeks in advance, because during the application period, it's very hard if someone come to us and go like, look, I need to apply for Finland. It's impossible because we are engaged during the application period so much in a way that we cannot honestly, answer phone calls or talk to customers because it's a very short application period. And that's the exact reason why we are conducting these sessions in advance. So whoever want to apply, this is the time to apply. So I would like to continue presentation, I need to tell you one thing. I understand you may have some questions about the process. I'll allow you some time after the delivery of the session for you to pop up any questions you may have. So, what kind of requirements you need to have when applying for Sweden and Finland? I first clear the bachelor's applicants because our primary focus have always been on the masters. But if there's anyone who's here to apply for bachelor's, the general requirement is to apply to have your A levels passed. You have to basically have at least 4 simple passes at GCV A levels, including general English. And then if you want to try an option like Finland, there's always an English proficiency test score requirement. The general requirement for a bachelor's is about 6 for each component, or 6 with at least 5.5 for each component, one of the two. And then I also highly recommend you to take up the test SAT, Scholastic Aptitude Test, because it works in a way. If you assume, let's say, we have 1,000 applications from Sri Lanka who want to apply for bachelor's. Now, let's say there's 1,000 applicants, they have done their A levels and they have done their IELTS. But if you complete some sort of a SAT score, that will kind of help you stand out from the rest of the crowd. The idea is, if there's 1,000 applicants who want to apply with A levels and IELTS, if you complete your SAT, the number of people who have completed their A levels, IELTS, and SAT will somewhere around 50. So you obviously have better chances to be admitted. So my recommendation is, if there's anyone here who want to apply for bachelor's in Finland, complete your IELTS first because that's the primary requirement. But if you manage to complete your IELTS requirement on time, then start working on SAT. There's plenty of, I think, 6 or 7 test centers in Sri Lanka. And it's a very good investment because you can certainly stand out from the crowd. So that's about bachelor's applicants. Now I need to discuss about masters because that's our primary market anyways. So the general requirement to apply for a master's, it depends. If you want to, our business model works in a way, we often apply for Sweden and Finland simultaneously for the same cost. So if anyone is applying through us, you pay us the same amount of money. I'll get that to you, a little later. And we can apply for both countries simultaneously, Sweden and Finland. And if there's anyone who's an individual applicant here, unmarried applicant, we can also add countries like Norway and Estonia, especially if you come from the tech software industry. Especially countries like Estonia, they don't have that many opportunities in other areas. But if you happen to be an unmarried applicant who comes from the software industry, Estonia can be an excellent option. So what we do is, our usual options are Sweden and Finland. And both of these countries allow families to go together with work rights. But in case if there's anyone here who's unmarried and who comes from the software industry, we're more than happy to add Norway and Estonia at no extra cost. And the entry requirement is to have a bachelor's. So if you have a pass for your bachelor's, at least a second lower or higher, you can always have better chances of receiving an admission. But even, let's say, if you have a GPA closer to a second lower, 2.7, 2.8, 2.6 at least, you can still, hope for an admission, especially from countries like Sweden, where there's plenty of university options are available. And then there's an interesting requirement for Sweden. Until the year of 22, they allowed all kinds of bachelor's degree holders to apply for their masters. But now they have changed their rules slightly. And whoever want to apply for Sweden, especially if you have your bachelor's earned from a Sri Lankan public university or UGC approved university within Sri Lanka, they expect your bachelor's to be 4 years in length. Again, this is applicable only for qualifications awarded by Sri Lankan universities. Let's say if there's someone who has completed their bachelor's at NSBM, I'm talking about the Plymouth affiliation, or if you have anyone who completed their bachelor's from Curtin University through SLIT, or if there's anyone who has, completed their bachelor's from Wolverhampton University through CINEC or any of these other private campuses, it doesn't matter. The 3-year requirement is not applicable in your case if you have a British or any other foreign degree, except Indian degrees. But if there's anyone who's completed a 3-year bachelor's degree from a Sri Lankan university or an Indian university, unfortunately, there's a 4-year requirement in place. So what they say is, if your degree is 3 years in length, you have to have a minimum of 1 year postgraduate qualification, like a master's, at least 1 year in length, in order to apply. So that's a strange requirement. We did not have it until 22, but then now they have that requirement in place. So if you have completed a 4-year bachelor's from any university, no issues at all. If you have completed a 3-year bachelor's from a foreign university, no issues at all. But if you have completed your bachelor's from a Sri Lankan university, where the degree length is 3 years, then you need a master's level qualification to qualify for Sweden. This doesn't apply for any other countries like Norway or Finland or Estonia. This is applicable only for Sweden, which is our core option. So that is kind of a requirement we have in place. That's about first thing. And then we can talk about the English proficiency test score requirement. Generally, Sweden has a very interesting provision. If you have completed your general English as a subject and at least have one simple pass, you can apply for an exemption from the IELTS requirement. But there are some exemptions. For an example, if anyone who want to apply for something like linguistics or English language, they still have that English proficiency requirement in place. But for 99% of all Swedish master's qualification delivered in English, you can use your general English pass to apply for an exemption from the IELTS requirement or the English proficiency test score requirement. It can be IELTS or PTE. But if you are to add Finland or any of these other countries like Estonia or Norway, you need to work on your IELTS. In case if you haven't done so already, you only have about 1 month ahead of you, especially if you want to go through us. For Sweden, we can use general English. For other countries, we need you to have an IELTS score, and the general requirement for most of the programs is to have 6.5 overall with 6 for each component. And then there's a PT requirement. The general requirement again is to have 62 overall with no component less than 59 for most universities. So if you can fulfill one of these test score requirements within the next 4 to 5 weeks time, we can still apply for all the options without missing any deadline. For Sweden, there's no IELTS requirement, provided you have passed your general English as a subject. And then the third one is you are able to pay a tuition fee and study in case if you do not have a scholarship. Common sense. But then again, the interesting thing is there are some countries, especially countries like Sweden, they will charge you by the first semester. So you have to basically pay for the first semester, and you can go there and continue to pay for remaining semesters while you are there. But unfortunately, it can become a kind of a high risk process if you have sufficient money only to cover the first semester. Our advice is if you are to go to Sweden, yes, you only have to pay for the first semester, but then at least have sufficient funds for the second semester, because the realistic situation in most of these non-English speaking countries is that it can take some time to find that first income opportunity. And until you find that, you obviously have to have some budget to go on your own. And let's assume if someone go to Sweden and find a job, if it takes 4 months to find that first job, you only have 2 months left to pay for your second semester. So our advice is to be prepared to pay, at least for the second semester on your own. I can give you an idea about the range of tuition fees. Normally, most non-technical subjects will cost you on average 10 to 12,000 euros, about 3.5 million to I would say 4 million rupees. And there are some universities, especially unis like University of Helsinki or Aalto University, some of these high-ranking universities, from Finland, where the tuition fee is around 15,000 euro mark. That is on average about 5 million plus rupees. But most other universities will on average charge you about 10 to 12,000, about 3.5 to 4 million Sri Lankan rupees. That's the average tuition fee. And then the fourth point is applicable only if you're applying for something related to, let's say, programs like business analytics. There are some universities in Sweden and in Finland where they want you to submit a GMAT score on top of your IELTS or PT, if that is applicable. It works in a way, I can even give you the names of these universities. If anyone is here who want to apply for business analytics, Aalto University in Finland and University of Oulu, both of these unis, they have made it compulsory to have a GMAT score when applying for these programs. And there are some other options as well, but I've seen this mostly with business analytics. And when it comes to Swedish universities, there are some unis like Uppsala and Gothenburg, where they have their first selection group process purely based on GMAT. So I will put it this way. If you have a first class degree and the right IELTS score, and if you want to stand out from the rest of Sri Lankans, try to complete a GMAT test because that will add some value to your application. And let's assume if there's 150 Sri Lankans with first class degrees applying for business related programs, the number of those with first class degrees, IELTS, and a GMAT score will be somewhere around 10 or 15. So that's the kind of idea I can give you. It's not a must. There's plenty of other options we can try without GMAT. But if you want to kind of apply for some of these high ranking universities and increase your chances of receiving some sort of a scholarship, you can work on GMAT. IELTS basically is a primary requirement. GMAT is more like an optional requirement. But in case if you want to give it a try, it's up to you. And again, this is applicable only for those who have any intentions of applying for business analytics or related programs. For any other program, you don't need to have GMAT scores. It's applicable only for certain business related options. And if you want to apply for software engineering, science related options, engineering, or health related options, there's no GMAT requirement in place for you. And the last one is about the ability to pay remaining tuition fees if admitted for a partial scholarship. Let's assume you receive a 50% scholarship. Your original tuition fee is 10,000 euros. Now you have to pay 5,000. You may pay about 2,500 euros and go there, but still you have to have that remaining amount of money, to be able to comfortably pay for the second semester. So that's about initial entry requirements. To summarize, you need to have a bachelor's degree. If you have a second, low, or higher, much better, especially if you're planning to apply for countries like Finland. But then the general requirement is to have a GPA closer to a second lower. And if you have graduated from a Sri Lankan university, it's always better to have a 4-year bachelor's. Or else, in case if your degree is a 3-year one, but still have some kind of a master's completed, you can still apply. If you have a British offshore degree or Irish offshore degree or Australian offshore degree, this 3-year requirement does not apply to you. So I'll quickly talk about the disadvantages of these countries. One of the first disadvantage, obviously, is the language barriers, because that's probably the key reason why people find it difficult to find employment in these countries, because you don't speak their language. So my advice is that's something you have to work on after arrival. They do have language classes, especially in countries like Sweden. They have Swedish for Immigrant centers scattered throughout the country where they teach Swedish language free of charge to all incoming immigrants with a personal number. But then again, you have to balance between your language classes, the tuition classes, or the actual, master's or bachelor's classes, plus whatever employment you are taking up. Can be, very hard time to pass. But then there's no other option. That's probably the most issue you will have in these countries when you arrive there as a recent immigrant. The second one is something we cannot change. They're known to have, some terrible weather all around the year, or most parts of the year. Nothing we can do about it. The third one is not really applicable nowadays because there's plenty of Sri Lankans. You think about the remote most university, let's say Mid Sweden University in Sweden, which is located about 700-800 kilometers from the capital, but you still have Sri Lankans there. So it doesn't matter much nowadays, but then you may come across certain cultural shock, especially if you move out of the big cities, because you may sometimes hardly encounter anyone from Sri Lanka or even from South Asia for that matter. But then again, it's no longer relevant that much because we do have international students and immigrants from this part of the world living in European countries, no matter what the location is. And the last part is also critical. And I had a chat with one of my former clients the other day, and we were discussing about this. It's a serious issue, difficulties in finding employment. My thought about that is immigration is also kind of an investment. Not every immigrant will become successful. Um, doesn't matter what the country is. So even if you forget about Sweden and Finland, you can find all sorts of complaints from students and immigrants about all sorts of countries. So that's just my thoughts about it. But then again, if you come from some sort of a technical background, let's say engineering or software background or R&D background, you may stand some chances in these countries compared to the others because the relevancy of language is slim if that is the case. But then if you perform in some sort of a customer facing role in Sri Lanka, it can be a banker or can be from customer service departments of any organization, sales, it can be very difficult for you to find a professional job in these countries without being able to speak their language. But then if there's a combination, let's say if husband has some sort of a technical background or software engineering background, a science background, and wives come from one of these humanities related background, then the person who comes from the humanities background can become the main applicant and apply for a master's because that allow the spouse to work full time and to find a job offer related to his whole field or area of expertise. That's my advice. You have to plan it in advance who can become the main applicant, and then that person can place the application being the main applicant. But there's something we can add there. Let's say if both of you have classes for your bachelor's, and if both of you want to apply, we usually process the application for the same cost. We do it because we also need to increase your chances of being able to secure a scholarship. But then again, our advice is not always you have to do that. That is applicable. Let's say if both of you have second uppers or second lowers or first class degrees, and both of you have taken up IELTS, then obviously instead of apply for one person for the same cost, we can apply for both individuals because instead of applying, let's say we normally apply for up to 7 to 8 masters from Sweden and Finland together. In this case, when husband and wife apply together, we can instead of apply for 16 different options. So that will increase your chances of being able to secure some sort of a scholarship. It's like 1 out of 8 versus 1 out of 16. And in the past, when you have done that, pretty much 10 out of 10 times, at least one person has managed to secure some sort of a scholarship. But I don't recommend you to apply for the sake of applying because it will kind of obviously increase our workload, but at the same time, it doesn't bring like productive results. So if the both of you are equally qualified, we can do that. Or else you can always decide who to become the main applicant. So my advice is when you decide that, you have to always think about who has the most amount of potential to find employment in these countries. So the person who has years of experience or the most amount of experience in a technical field or software industry or any other, science or R&D industries, then that person can become the spouse and the other person can apply to become the main applicant. It makes sense because whoever who come from these industries, they have better chances to find employment in these countries nowadays. And then I would like to talk about advantages because regardless of all the disadvantages, I think you still have a fair chance of fair go in these countries because they do have some advantages as well. First thing I see is the amount of scholarships they offer. If you already know about it, all the Scandinavian countries, at least at some point of time, used to offer absolute free education to international students. No other country in the world probably have done it. We do have countries, I'm talking about these mainstream countries. Sweden introduced their fees in 2011. Prior to that, they were offering absolute free education. Finland used to offer absolute free education till 2019, and we took the kind of advantage of having free education from 2010 to 2019. But surprisingly, even in the year of 2019, the number of students going from Sri Lanka to Finland were around 50 or below that. Interesting. But now they go in the thousands and they're willing to pay a tuition fee. I don't know what's the real reason behind it. So that is the key advantage I see in these countries, especially if you think about Finland. During the last year, at least 70 to 80% of all our applicants had, on the minimum, had at least 20%. Some of them, bachelor's applicants, they had 20% some scholarships. These are not scholarships; they are called early bird discounts. But those who went there for their masters, on the minimum, they had 40, close to 40% deductions from their tuition fees, which is good, relatively lower. And Finland and Sweden, they both listed within the top 10 countries when it comes to Human Development Index. And I can definitely assure no other country which make it to that top 10 list will offer that kind of a tuition fee range. It's a fact. Because if you get 40% deduction, you only pay about 6,000 euros, comes to about 2 million some rupees. And I believe it's relatively affordable than most other countries in the same within the same league. And the second one is social security benefits, regardless of the visa. Even if you go there as a student or some sort of a work permit holder, most of these Nordic countries allow you to access some social benefits. In the sense, like in the event of hospitalization, the amount you pay is probably similar to that of a citizen. That's one. And also, they do provide free education for your children, um, including state-funded daycares. So all that is there. And yes, there are some other countries who provide a similar level of support to all immigrants. But then again, most of these countries are located in Europe, maybe except Canada. And the third one is ability to apply for a work permit, even with an entry-level kind of a job offer, which is more like a theoretically accurate answer nowadays. Because if you think about a country like Sweden, they have set a salary threshold around 28,500 kroners, the last time I checked. And the requirement is to find a job offer that meets this salary threshold. But then, back then, I would say before about 4 or 5 years back, that threshold was just 13,250 Swedish kronor. So pretty much every job you find in Sweden, if it is a full-time one, paid you more than that. So most of our previous clients, long time back, they used to apply for work permits for jobs like cleaning, housekeeping, and all that. But now it has become theoretically impossible to find some kind of an entry-level job offer that pays you the traditional requirement for a work permit. So now you have to, at least be a cleaning supervisor to meet that salary requirement. But then there's no any legal requirement as to this is the kind of job you had to find. You had to find something related to your studies. You had to find something related to certain employment background. There's no such requirement. They have mentioned a threshold, and if you find a full-time offer that meets the threshold, you are able to apply for a work permit. So that's one advantage I see in these countries. I already covered about this part: accessible healthcare facilities, free education for children, including state-funded daycare facilities for the most, ability to study all vocational training. That's also something I had to tell you. Because if you plan the process well, even I receive some complaints, not really complaints, but I've seen my own clients. Sometimes whenever they talk to me, they mention about difficulties in finding employment and all that, which I completely agree. But then if you plan the process well, I think you can still stand a chance. I've seen people who have done that. For an example, if you think about a country like Sweden, they offer all vocational training programs free of charge, no tuition fees. But then all these programs are conducted in the Swedish language. So I've seen at least a reasonable number of clients of my own. What they have done is when they move into Sweden, one person always complete the language. They kind of try to master the language. You have to obviously spend at least a year or more to acquire the required level of fluency in the Swedish language. Usually it's called level D. I've heard it'll take about a year or more to acquire that kind of proficiency in the Swedish language. But if you obtain a level D certificate, then all the vocational training programs are delivered free of charge. So if you plan the process well, usually a master's program will last about 2 years' time, and then you are allowed to stay in the country for another year to find, employment. If you plan the process well from the day one, by the time the main applicant completes the master's, the secondary applicant will also be able to complete some sort of a vocational qualification, which will help you or kind of ease out the process of finding employment in the long term, to find a job offer that kind of pay you the salary threshold requirement of 28,500 kroners. So that is also a definite advantage if you plan the process well. If one of you could complete some sort of vocational training in the long term, I'm sure it can help you out eventually. Assuming the other person, the main applicant, fails to secure employment within that post-study time period given. And the last point is about having an inclusive system in place to absorb immigrants. As I mentioned before, most of these countries, they offer language classes, mostly free of charge to all incoming immigrants. They do have opportunities for vocational training for most of the immigrants. They also have opportunities for networking and professional development that may help you increase your chance of finding employment. All that is available because they at least try to create or try to maintain an inclusive system in place to support all immigrants. In fact, I was surprised to learn 1/3 of the population in Sweden is actually born overseas. You can go and do a bit of a fact check, and even I didn't know that until lately. So I'd like to quickly talk about things to be concerned because, as I mentioned before, mostly 90% of everything comes to your budget. You either have to have a scholarship of some sort, or if you are to go there as a fee-paying applicant, my recommendation is to have sufficient funds at least to cover the first year of your tuition fees and 6 months worth of living expenses. So on average, I'll put it this way. If you're an individual applicant, I recommend you to have at least good 750 euros nowadays. Um, these are not like high-end budgets, very minimal budgets, but survivable. 750 is approximately about let's say 250,000 for an individual applicant, about 300,000 for a family of two, and 50,000 for each additional child in case if you have children. So if you are to go there with a 6 months worth of budget, you need at least 1.5 million for an individual, 1.8 million for a family of two, and 2.1 million for a family of three. If you have that kind of a budget set aside for your living expenses, you can feel safe knowing that you have 6 months time ahead of you to find the first income opportunity. There are some advantages in these countries as well. If you think about a country like Sweden, they have no restrictions whatsoever, even for the main applicant when it comes to work rights. You do have full work rights in Sweden as an international student. even if you go there for a bachelor's program. And in fact, Sweden and Estonia are probably the only countries in from that part of the world where they allow international students to work full time. Is it easy to find a job? No. Is it possible to work full time? Yes. If you try hard to find an opportunity, then yes, you can work full time as long as it doesn't affect your study hours. The second one is about, having sufficient funds to cover up your living expenses. As I mentioned before, I recommend you to have about 1.5 million for an individual applicant, at least for the first 6 months to go on your own, 1.8 for a family of two, and 2.1 for a family of three. Because having that kind of a budget will leave you enough room to start working hard on finding that first income opportunity, and you have 6 months to do that. And the third one is about your willingness to learn the local language and to make local contact. There's something you have to work on. As I mentioned before, one of my clients told me, in fact, a long time back, he was like, Shamak, I had a meeting with this employment agency, public employment agency. And when I informed them that I come from a banking background in Sri Lanka, I want to find a job as a cleaner. That's exactly what he told me. He was questioned by this officer from the other end about why he want to become a cleaner when he has banking experience. And then he told me when he replied back saying it's because he does not believe he cannot, he can find any kind of banking job in Sweden. Then that's why. And what he was told by them is that if you keep working on the language, if you can master the Swedish language, you may stand a chance to find a job offer at a bank. It's not a made up story. I heard it from a client of mine, and I can give you one real example. I have processed, I think, over 150 plus bankers from Sri Lanka, from all major banks. And I only know of one person. She used to work at Union Bank in Sri Lanka, and she's the only banker I know from Sweden. She managed to find a job at a Swedish bank, and she about a couple of years back became a citizen. I don't think it's nice to mention the name, but she sent me a message informing she became a citizen, and she's the only person I know out of a sample of about 150 plus who have managed to find a job at a Swedish bank while having a banking background from Sri Lanka. Why? Maybe because she's smart, and also she worked very hard on learning the Swedish language. So she found her first banking job within the first 6 months. That's one reason why I don't agree with some of these individuals who go like, there's no point of going to these countries, there's no jobs and all. Yes, it can be applicable to most, but if you're confident about your abilities, you do have full work rights. If you are confident about your skill set and your ability to find employment, then as long as you don't spend all your life savings on the journey, it can be an option worth considering. So the next point is about the ability to try securing a full-time job offer for the spouse. As I mentioned before, you have about two different pathways here. When you want to settle down in these countries, if you are the main applicant, the student, you can obviously complete your master's and then apply for post-study time. Usually in Sweden, they allow you to stay 1 year after completion of your master's to look for employment. In Finland, they allow you to stay 2 years after graduation to look for employment. And then you have the possibility of finding a job that pays you the salary threshold requirement. In Sweden, it's about 28,500 Swedish kroners. In Finland, it's about 14,000 euros annual. If you or your spouse, if one of you can find a job offer, the other person can naturally stay in the country with work rights. So if one of you find a job offer, the other can stay. And that's also something you should know and something you can do. And the last one is more like a request. My advice is to complete your studies, no matter what you do, before thinking about applying for a work permit. The reason is if you, let's say, it happened to one of my clients some time back, I think last year. She called me all of a sudden and she was like, look, we applied for a work permit. And then the company kind of had a layoff and I lost the job. And now they have given me 3 months, to find a new job. And after about 3 months' time, she called me and said she did not find any new job, so she had to apply for a work study visa again by applying for some sort of a master's or bachelor's program. I cannot recall. And they were asked to go out of the European Union and wait till a decision is made. So they returned to Sri Lanka, very anxious. She was um, going through a tremendous stress because they didn't know if the visa is refused, they cannot go back again. And luckily, they got their visa, so they're in Sweden again. But what she told me is if she completed the qualification she went there for, she would have gotten a chance to stay in the country and even apply for another student visa. So what she did instead is she decided to switch her visa from a student visa to a work permit without completing the entire qualification. People used to do that back then. You can still do it now theoretically because Swedish law says if you have completed a minimum of 30 credits first semester, if you have a full-time job offer, you can switch to a work permit. But then my advice is it's always better if you can complete your master's or bachelor's first. Your spouse can obviously continue to work full-time, gain some working experience, even maybe approach the employer and inform the willingness you have to apply for a work permit in the long term, but complete the academic qualification because that will give you some sort of a security. If something goes wrong, you can always at least try to apply for another study program provided you both are gainfully employed. And how the process looks like if you apply through us, basically it's a three-step process. um, we can categorize it as assessment process, actual application process, and the visa process. Usually what happens during the first stage is we need you to submit a copy of your degree cert, transcript, and passport copy, along with our assessment application and the assessment fee, which is 35,000 rupees. That's the first step. In case if there's anyone who want to apply for bachelor's, the requirement is to submit your O levels, A levels, passport copy, and our assessment application along with the fee. Once you hand over these documents, we can, within a couple of weeks' time, get back to you with a list of options available for you to apply with an increased probability to secure an offer. We can also provide you all the course contents and all exact documents we need from your end to process you further. That's the first step. Once you pick your options from our list, you can submit all supporting documents and the actual application fee of 185,000 rupees, which will cover the all possible actual application fees involved. As I mentioned before, if the two of you or husband and wife decide to apply together just to increase chances of securing some sort of a scholarship, you only have to pay us a single assessment fee and a single actual application fee. We only charge from one person, but that is in case if you have very high merits, there's no point of applying for both for the sake of applying. But let's say if you have completed your IS course, or if you have first class or second upper or second lower degrees, both of you, and if you feel like you will have better chance if the two of you apply, we're more than happy to accommodate your request. So what will happen then is if you apply on time from the first day of March until about the end of April, that's the application time period for all these countries. Then we can get to know all actual outcomes, pick the best option, and initiate the visa process. So visa process is different from one country to another. But firstly, I'll cover our charges. So for the visa process, whenever you move there, if you have a scholarship for at least 50%, we charge about 450,000 from the main applicant and extra 100,000 from spouse. In case if your scholarship value is below 49%, or in case if you decide to go in as a fee paying applicant, then our charges will come down to 350,000 for the main applicant and 100,000 for the co-applicant. That's about our charges. 35,000 assessment fee, after which we can confirm the options and the course contents and all exact document requirements. And then you pick your options from the list we provide, submit all documents along with the actual application fee, which is 185. So basically, this is what you pay us prior to the admission. If we apply on time in the month within the month of March and April, we can receive the admission decisions, pick the best one, go for the visa process, and we charge about 450 plus 100,000 in case if you have a scholarship for at least 50% or more, and in case if it's less than 49%, or you decide to go in as a fee paying applicant, then these charges will come down to 350 plus 100,000. And to align the interest of these countries with ours, we don't charge anything from children. And surprisingly, a couple of years back, we had a family with 6 children. That's 6 different applications, and we still adhere to our principles. And now I want to talk about the visa process a bit. As I mentioned before, there are some very similar characteristics of Swedish and Finnish visa processes because both processes are handled online. We don't have to physically hand over any document to any authority initially. What will happen? Let's start with Sweden. What will happen is once you're admitted, we need you to submit certain documents, very minimalistic. We need your admission, passport copies of any applicant, your bank statements, and if you're married, we need a copy of your marriage cert and translation. And if you have children, we need copies of their birth certificate and translation. That's it. And then there are some contents to fill up. We can apply for the visa, and 2 possible scenarios are there for Sweden. Best case scenario, they will send you a notification requesting you to appear for a biometric visit at the embassy. You just, if that is the case, there's no interviews whatsoever. You can visit the Swedish embassy in New Delhi on any weekday in the morning time, provide your thumbprints and photograph. There's a small courier fee to be paid, I think around 1,000 Indian rupees, and then you're free to come back. Once you come back, 99.99 times your visas will be granted, and all what will happen is once you wait for about 2 to 3 weeks, you are able to collect that plastic resident permit card, which is the kind of visa they issue nowadays, through the honorary consul for Sweden in Sri Lanka. That's the best case scenario. The second possible scenario is they can send you a notification requesting additional information. What they will usually say is they will go like, the information you have provided is not sufficient for us to make a decision, and therefore we need you to visit the embassy of Sweden in New Delhi for an interview. If that's the case, we have to contact the embassy, request an appointment date and time. You have to visit them on the requested date, complete your interview, and then you can still come back. Interestingly, they take your biometric data at the same time, so there's no second visit required most of the times. So what will happen is same drill. If you get through the interview, if your visa is granted, then you will receive your cards through the honorary consul. And now let's have a look at Finland. Let's show more the same process. The only difference for Finland is as a part of the visa, there's a compulsory interview requirement. And interestingly, our masters are usually focused on research universities, and they very hardly question applicants from research universities compared to the ones who are going for USS. It's a different story. I don't want to talk about it much, but we can help you prepare for interviews. And again, if you go for masters, if you have an admission from one of the 9 research universities, there's nothing much to worry about. The only issue with Finland we have nowadays is there's thousands of Sri Lankans who are applying. So even we are facing some difficulties with securing appointments and all that, which is something we can manage. For example, we have cleared this year's batch without a trouble. Although we had to navigate around these difficulties because of the increased number. But then the difference for Finland is they have outsourced the process to Wayfish now. So although you apply for your visa online, you have to secure an appointment through VFS to appear for biometrics. And they also have as a part of the visa process, they have a one-on-one interview. But then once you face the interview, you can come back to Sri Lanka. And if your resident permit is granted, they will send this permit card to the VFS center in Colombo. And for both countries, you also have to work on finances. There's a general financial requirement. I'll put it this way. Sweden, starting from the last year, they allow you to apply now for full-length resident permits. The difference between Sweden and Finland is, for Finland, they kind of okay to have sufficient funds for the first year. They can still grant you a 2-year visa based on 1 year worth of funds. But in Sweden, they want you to have sufficient funds for the entire length if you want to apply for a full-length visa. So that's one of the key differences. The second one is, in Sweden, if you want to apply for a 2-year visa, both the applicants are eligible to apply for the full-length visa. Whereas in Finland, only the main applicant is allowed to apply for a full-length visa. All the secondary applicants usually have to apply for 1-year renewable visas, which is also an advantage to a certain extent, because let's say the husband and wife go to Finland, husband is probably, let's say, wife is the student and husband decides to find a job offer there. If he can find a job offer, that means the traditional requirement for a work permit, which is 14,000 euros annual. Next time when he's about to renew the visa, instead of renewing his visa, he can apply for a work permit. So I take it as something positive, but then that's the norm. They will allow you, the student, to apply for a full-length visa. If the program runs for 4 years, they will allow you to apply for a 4-year visa. But all the accompanying family members are allowed to apply for visas that's 1 year in length, which is okay. In Sweden, they allow you to apply for full-length visa as long as you have funds. So I want to talk a bit about the fund requirement. I'll give you a ballpark figure at the moment. We can, if you are to go through us, we can discuss about these processes in details. The average requirement is to have about, if you're an individual applicant, I recommend you to have about 6 million rupees, less or more, in your possession. If there's two of you, I recommend you to have at least 9 million. And if there's any additional, or if you have any children, I recommend you to have at least 2 million for each child. So 6 million for an individual, about 9.5 million for the two of you, and about 10 or 10.5 if you are a family of 3. And you have to add at least 2 million if you have additional children. So that's kind of a ballpark figure. I don't want to talk about the exact amounts quoted because that's just a funny story. My advice about it is, do not ever have the exact same amount of money estimated by the migration agency, because it looks like it's some sort of a manipulated or kind of a crafted bank balance, because it's pretty normal. There's no way you can have the exact figures estimated by the migration authorities for several months unless you specifically prepare for the journey, which is also not that, it doesn't look that kind of legit. So my advice is always have at least 20-25% more than the expected amount, because it will kind of make the process more smooth. I can give you one example. I was having a chat with one of my very recent clients, and he told me there's hundreds of Sri Lankans waiting to receive Finnish visa decisions because they have all apparently sold lands. One of the very first advices we give our clients always, and sometimes it kind of it doesn't backfire on us, but some clients complain like, this is how the others have done it. They have shown their, property sale evidence and all that. Our advice is try to be as much as unique as possible, because if you stand out from the rest, you have better chances to go through a very smooth process. If you want to follow all the Sri Lankans and produce the same amount of documents with, like very similar documents, property sales as evidence, and then you have exact same bank balance like the others, they can create trouble. So we're pretty confident about the process. And as I mentioned before, this depends how you can show these funds, how much you're going to show, what kind of source of funds you can submit. We would like to discuss these things individually, because we want to, if we apply for about 30, 35 different clients, we always try to maintain 35 separate applications with 35, different characteristics, because that will increase chances of being able to secure a visa. Just our thought about it. Um, there's no anywhere you'll find this information written as this is how you should do it, but then that's just how we believe in the process, and it's proven to work. And I would like to talk about the steps again. You have assessment process as the first step. You have to submit your degree set transcript and passport copy along with our assessment application and fee. If it's bachelor's, your A levels, O levels, and passport copy plus our assessment application and the fee. Then the actual application process, you can pick your options from our assessment outcome, which is usually given within the couple of weeks' time after you hand over everything. And then you can submit the actual application, fee, which is 185,000 rupees. And then we can move to the visa process. I already discussed about the visa process. I want to tell you a bit about the visa fees involved. For Sweden, the average visa fee involved is around 1,500 Swedish kroners for the main applicant. Same for any adult applicants. Usually it's about 50,000 rupees, and half of that for children. Finland has a kind of different types of fees. For the main applicant, they charge, if I'm not mistaken, because the visa fees were increased very recently this year. So I don't have it in my mind, like registered, and I used to have it. I think for the student, it's around 450 euros. Usually, it's around 150, 160,000 rupees. For the secondary applicant, they charge around 550 euros something, comes to about almost 200,000 or slightly more than that. And for each child, if I recall it right, they charge about 270 euros something, comes to about almost 80,000 rupees or so. So it is very expensive compared to countries like Sweden. But then again, I only recommend Finland as an option if you have some sort of a reasonable scholarship. So if you have a scholarship, paying slightly higher visa fee won't be a problem most of the times. And I have given here a summary of all these expenses. If you go through us, you have to work about the assessment fee, which is 35,000, application fee 185,000, visa fees usually about 1,500 Swedish kroners, or 50,000 for an adult applicant and half of that for a child. And in Finland, it's about 160, close to about 160,000 rupees for the main applicant, about 200,000 or slightly more than that for the secondary applicant, and about 80,000 or slightly more than that for a child. And then you have to think about your air tickets. Usually, there's a couple of air tickets involved, as you have understood the process. You need to think about the flying cost from Colombo to New Delhi when you want to visit the embassy, and also have to think about the cost of air ticket from Colombo to the major destination, be it Helsinki, Stockholm, Oslo, anywhere else. So there's two types of tickets involved here. For Sweden and Finland, you have to go through the embassy in New Delhi, so you have to add that air ticket value. Usually, a ticket nowadays will cost about 100,000 rupees return. For Norway, in case if there's any unmarried applicant who want us to add Norway as an option, you do have VFS in Colombo, where the process has been completely outsourced to them now. So you don't have to visit anywhere. But let's assume if you want to visit the Estonian embassy, they practice an old school process. They don't even have an electronic application process. What will happen is you have to fill up this paper application, visit the embassy, submit your documents, wait there during the processing time, which can take about 10 working days. And they will initially issue an entry visa. Once you come back with the entry visa and go there on time to join your program, you can apply for your temporary resident permit within Estonia. Surprisingly, Estonia is known to be the most digitally advanced nation in the world when it comes to digital infrastructure. They're the number one in the world. But for some surprising reason, the visa process is the old school system of all the other options. When you compare all the other options, they have the old school system where you had to fill up paper applications now to obtain a visa. As I mentioned before, if you are an unmarried applicant who comes from the software industry, and if you have an IELTS or PT score, we can add Estonia at no extra cost, and it can be a super cool option. In fact, that's my favorite option for an individual applicant. It comes from the software industry. Cheaper living expenses, plenty of opportunities around for obviously for a lesser amount of earnings, but then that experience is very well worth it because you still live in the Schengen zone. You're getting paid reasonably well than most others. If you're from the software industry, can do a bit of traveling, and if I were you, I'll probably pick that as the number one option. But it's only valid for those who come from the software industry. Other people obviously will have difficult time finding employment in countries like that. Let's say if you go there, you come from some sort of let's say professional background like marketing or sales, you can probably make more money in Sri Lanka rather than going into a country like that without knowing their language. So, and then you have to think about other expenses. As I mentioned before, when you visit the Swedish embassy, you have to pay a courier fee there, usually about 1,000 Indian rupees. When you visit the Finnish embassy, they have certain requirements like legalizing the marriage certificate, for an example. You have to pay about 3,300 rupees INR to have this document done. So I recommend you to set aside at least 50,000 rupees um, to cover these um, you know, um, expenses that are not the major most ones, but then you still have to pay some of these expenses like legalization charges, maybe accommodation if you decide to stay in New Delhi for a longer time. By the way, that is something I need to tell you. For Sweden and Finland both, if you manage the process well, it's more like an in and out process. There's no requirement for you to stay there for a long time period. But on the other hand, since you are paying about 100,000 for an air ticket, sometimes it can be worthy to do a bit of sightseeing without returning on the same date. So that's about the expenses. Now, I want to talk about the pathways of settling down because ultimately that's what most of us want to do. So there's two major pathways here. There can be other avenues as well, such as setting up a business and all. I'm not going to talk about it because honestly, even I don't know much about it. I know for a fact that there are other pathways, but these two are the most commonly used pathways by you know pretty much all of us Sri Lankans to settle down in these countries. One is to apply for a work permit. As I mentioned before, you do have few options there, especially if you are a married applicant, you have the ability to find a job yourself, or you can your spouse can also find a job. As long as one of you can do that, um, you are able to apply for a work permit. And about 4 to 5 years on a work permit, you will be eligible to apply for permanent residency. So it can take a total of about 7 years nowadays to become a permanent resident in these countries. But the moment you secure a work permit, you will have access to all these major social benefits. You'll have a multiple entry visa. You're allowed to go in and out. So it's not much of a concern. And the next one is my preferred most and recommended most pathway to try to secure an opportunity to apply for a PhD. May not be easy, like finding a job. Even finding a job can be difficult, but compared to that, I think securing a PhD can be a difficult thing to do because there's lot many candidates and a lot less opportunities available. Uh, but then if you can perform so well academically, you may stand a chance. The idea is all PhDs and pretty much all Scandinavian countries are considered as employment. So if you can get into a PhD, not only you'll be paid a monthly stipend to cover up your living expenses, you will receive a work permit where you can fulfill that 4 year requirement by completing your research opportunities. So by that, like Sweden, I think they still have that law in place. Has law where they say anyone who completes a PhD from a Swedish university is entitled to apply for permanent residency without any waiting time. So that's something you can seriously consider, especially if you have any academic interests in the long run. But the most commonly used one is to apply for a work permit because, as I mentioned before, if you find a job offer, there's a salary threshold requirement in Sweden is 28,500 and in Finland is 14,000 annual and in Sweden is 28,500 monthly. If you can find a job offer or if your spouse can find a job offer, you can apply for a work permit. So receiving a work permit is more likely, it's equivalent to settling down in these countries. So let's um, quickly cover any questions you may have. I know I have already received some today. If you have any questions, feel free to verbally ask them, or you can simply send me a message in the inbox. Um, Kuganantham has a question. Can you please repeat regarding English requirement because previously there was a network issue. All right. So Kuganantham, the requirement is if you want to apply for a bachelor's, you need to have at least 6 for each component if it is IELTS, or if it's PTE, it's better to have 59 for each component. It's about bachelor's. And then if you want to apply for a master's, the general requirement is to have 6.5 with 6 for each component if it's IELTS. And if it's PTE, the requirement is 62 overall with no component less than 59. One of the two. And then let's assume you want to apply for Sweden only. And if you have passed your general English as a subject at A levels, you can still apply without having any English proficiency test score. I hope that clears the question. And hey, Roche, can you please tell me on the IS applicable PT? I already covered it, Roche. You can use any of the tests. If it is IELTS for masters, it's about 6.5 is 6. If it's PT, better to have 62 overall with no component less than 59. Hansini is a question, are there any early year intakes for engineering? There's no such intakes, Hansini. Surprisingly, I've noticed like people, not everyone, some of them, they advertise this January intake, but to be honest, only about 10 to 15% of all programs are available in the month of Jan. So if you want to confidently apply and, best utilize your chance of securing a scholarship, I believe there's only one intake in these countries, and that's autumn. And if you are to apply for autumn, this is the time to apply. Lianage has also a question, can I apply for PhD in health administration? If you have a bachelor's and master's, theoretically, yes, you do have what it takes to apply. But then again, our services are focused on masters. To be honest, we have in the very early tried to cater to PhD market, but we realize it's very difficult because the subject areas are different, the ways, the requirements set by the supervisors are different from one area to another. So it's very hard to become that middleman. So, but then again, if you have completed a bachelor's and master's already, and if you have the right English proficiency test score or the ability to, obtain this score at a short notice, the way you can try is if you create a list of Scandinavian universities, be it from Iceland or Norway or Denmark or Sweden or Finland, if you visit their careers or employment pages, you can find ongoing studentships related to PhDs. There you'll find the selection criteria and instructions. Um, the successful most method to apply for a PhD, I believe, is to create a list of options and apply across a period of time. You may not be able to receive an offer within the first month or two, but if you set aside, let's say, 1 year time period, and if you have the basic requirements, and if you start tying from the day one, you'll be able to probably receive an admission within that kind of a time period. Very probable. But then do not stick to one country and expect an offer because it doesn't work that way at the doctoral level. It's highly competitive and the amount of opportunities are very limited. It's better to create a list of opportunities from diverse range of countries as long as they pay you a stipend. and the overall situation of the university is good, you can keep trying. That's just my thought about it. Shivani has a question. If I finish my level 7 okay, teaching English as a secondary language with distinction, but before that completed BA in graphic design, working experience, graphic design, social media marketing, currently unemployed, apply for jobs. Would I be able to apply with teaching English as a secondary language qualification? Well, we cannot really advise you on recruitment or any kind of employment, Shivani. We don't do that. If you're asking if your TESOL qualification is good enough to apply for a master's, no, it's considered as more like a professional qualification. But if that is the case, since you have completed a bachelor's degree in graphic design, you can use that to apply for a master's. But then most of the times you have to, apply for a master's that's related to your first degree. So your teaching qualification, unfortunately, will not pave the way for employment most of the times in these Scandinavian countries because they all, I mean, the type of opportunities they have and the type of requirements they have for teachers can be completely different than what you're used to. So if you are to go into these countries, you may apply for a job directly, but then again, the process works in a way you have to identify opportunities and keep applying directly for multiple number of vacancies across a certain period of time to increase kind of chances you have to find a job. We cannot offer any services related to employment. But if you have a valid degree, we can help you apply for a master's related to that bachelor's. Praveen has a question. Can we apply if the degree we hold is HND plus one final year one? Absolutely. If you're talking about completing or having completed a top-up degree, you can confidently apply. Nothing wrong with it, provided your HND is a valid one. Let's say if you have completed a PSN HND, or if you have completed some sort of NDT qualification from Moratua or TTI from Katunayaka, or even options like SLIAT or any kind of a recognized HND, you can certainly use that along with the final year top-up. Another question regarding IELTS, what the situation if one already has a British bachelor's and master's having studied in UK? Interesting. If you have completed your degree physically in the UK, and if you have a copy of your resident permit to prove that, you don't need IELTS for any of these countries. But if you have completed your degree as an offshore degree, you still need IELTS for most of these Finnish universities. I'm talking about Finnish research unis. We don't apply for USS. So if it is physically completed, you don't need IELTS for any of these countries, by the way. All right, that's all I have for the moment. Shivani, okay, I think I have received some replies as well. Shivani says, I can try with graphic design BA, but if this is a GPA score, and what about working experience? The working experience has no relevancy with the selection process, at least for most of these programs. But then you need a fair GPA score. What you can do, Shivani, is I'm going to leave our numbers right after this conversation. I can send us a message, and if possible, send us a copy of your transcript or at least GPA and the name of the university where you have obtained this from, so we can provide you with a better answer. Chandima also has a question. Are there any age restrictions for applying masters? Again, it depends, Chandima. For an example, I had a client who's a medical doctor by profession, and he was 53 years old when he moved to Sweden for his master's in public health. His requirements slightly different. He had no kids. He's married, and he just wanted to, have a different kind of experience, learning experience. And we pretty much declared the same thing on the visa application, and he was allowed to go there. But then again, let's assume he was 53 years old, and then he had children who are about to be adults around that age range, 16, 17. I don't think it would have been possible. So it depends on your circumstances. If you are, let's say, an unmarried applicant, it doesn't matter much, you can apply, provided we come up with valid reasons as to why we're going at that age. But if you have grown children who are about to become adults, if you are around that age range, then it creates some kind of high risk situation. That's just our thoughts about it. But by the way, none of these countries have imposed any kind of age requirement. So I'll put it this way: the older you are, the higher the risk is. Kesara, okay, Praveen has another question. If we recently finished a degree and don't have transcript and degree certificate, but can get a confirmation from SIT, can we go ahead with the process? It depends on the timeline. If you can provide the final transcript at least by the beginning of January, you can still apply. If you do not have the final transcript on the minimum, then it becomes kind of an experimental process because it's up to these authorities to accept your application with the versions of documents you submit. Kesar also has a question. If I've done my master's in the UK, definitely I can apply for PhD without IELTS. Most of the times, yeah. But then, as I mentioned before, when you want to apply for PhD, it's something you have to do on your own. So better to check with the requirements set by the respective university. I can confirm about the master's requirements at the moment. If you have completed your bachelor's or master's level qualification from the UK or any other English speaking country, like be it Canada, New Zealand, Australia, or the USA, you don't need any kind of English proficiency test score requirement to apply for a master's level program. It's less or more the same for PhDs as well, but then you have to check the requirements set by each and every university. Um, yeah, that's pretty much all I have for the moment. And if you guys have any questions about the process, what you can do is you can contact us using these numbers. The first one is 0762803838. The second is 0770 287872. Or you can use the WhatsApp number, the last one 071560 sorry, triple three. So what will happen now is I'm going to send you the assessment application along with a link to this recording. So in case if you join us in the middle, or in case if you go back and check some part of this discussion, you're more than welcome to do that. And if you are to go through us or initiate the process, you can send us the completed assessment application along with the supporting documents. And Chandima has a question. If you have to obtain loans, will it be a problem? It can create a risk for the process, Chandima. It's about your repayment ability. So my understanding of taking up a bank loan is it's not about the process. If you're asking about the process, it doesn't hinder or make it difficult. There are ways we can manage the process. But then the real question is how good you can prepay the loans once you go there, especially as a paying applicant, because as I mentioned before, it can take some months for you to find that first job. So until then, you should have the ability to manage your finances back home. So it entirely depends on your personal circumstances. If you can give us a call, maybe we can give you a better advice about it. So I will share the recording of this session along with our assessment instructions, hopefully by tonight or by the latest tomorrow. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact us. And if you have decided to apply, you can send us the required documents along with the assessment application for the initial phase. And that's pretty much it for today. And thank you so much again for your time. And we'll be in touch. Thank you. Have a good one. Good night.